Major Sarah Mitchell stood at attention outside the briefing room at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. At 35, she had the weathered look of someone who had seen combat up close, too close. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and despite the early June heat, not a single bead of sweat appeared on her forehead. 15 years in the Marines had taught her discipline in all things, including her body's response to discomfort. She had arrived at Camp Lejeune just yesterday, transferred from a classified operation overseas. Her new assignment, to lead a special tactical unit being formed to handle sensitive missions. What those missions were, she hadn't yet been told. That was the purpose of today's briefing. "You must be the new admin assistant," said a voice from behind her. Sarah turned to see a man in his 40s with captain's bars on his collar and a smirk that suggested he found himself more charming than others might. His name tape read, Reynolds. "I'm looking for the new officer they're sending us," Captain Reynolds continued before she could respond. "Supposed to be some hotshot, guess they're running late." Two other officers standing nearby chuckled. Sarah noticed they also wore captain's insignia. She remained silent, her face betraying nothing. "Well, don't just stand there," Reynolds said, gesturing to the door. "Go on in and set up the coffee service. Colonel Barnes likes his black 2 sugars. The smirk widened. "And what's your name, darling? We might as well get acquainted since we'll be working together." The other captains weren't even trying to hide their amusement now. One of them, a red-faced man with thinning hair, actually snorted. "Mitchell," she replied evenly. "Just Mitchell, no rank?" Reynolds asked, eyebrows raised in mock concern. "You civilians need to learn military courtesy. We use ranks around here." He looked at his companions. "Let's teach her, shall we? I'm Captain Reynolds. This is Captain Landry and Captain Ortiz." Landry and Ortiz nodded, still smiling. "Now you try," Reynolds continued, speaking slowly as if to a child. "What's your rank, Mitchell?" Before Sarah could answer, the door to the briefing room opened. A tall man with silver hair and the eagle insignia of a full colonel stepped out. His weathered face bore a long scar from his left temple to his jaw, and his eyes were so pale blue they appeared almost colorless. His name tape read, Barnes. "Gentlemen," Colonel Barnes said, his voice surprisingly soft for a man his size. "I see you've met Major Mitchell." The smiles vanished from the captains' faces. "Major," Reynolds repeated, blinking rapidly. "Major Sarah Mitchell," Barnes continued. "Formerly attached to Special Operations Command, call sign Shadow Reaper." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sounds of the base seemed to fade away. "Shadow Reaper," Ortiz whispered, his face draining of color. Sarah had grown accustomed to this reaction. The name had followed her since Afghanistan, where she had led a series of night raids against high-value targets with such precision and lethality that even hardened Taliban fighters had begun to whisper about the American shadow that brought death. "I believe Captain Reynolds was asking about my rank," Sarah said calmly. "To answer your question, Captain, I'm a major in the United States Marine Corps. I've been in service for 15 years with 4 combat tours. And yes, I do know how Colonel Barnes takes his coffee, but fortunately for everyone involved, making it isn't in my job description." Reynolds opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No words came out. "Major Mitchell will be leading this task force," Colonel Barnes said. "You 3 will be reporting directly to her. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," the 3 captains mumbled in unison, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. "Good, now let's begin the briefing," Barnes gestured toward the open door. "After you, Major." As Sarah walked into the room, she could feel the captain's stares on her back. She had been in this position before, underestimated, dismissed, mocked, and she knew exactly how this would play out. They would test her, challenge her, look for any sign of weakness, and she would give them none. The briefing room was austere. A long table, chairs, a projection screen. Maps of various regions were pinned to the walls, along with satellite images of terrain Sarah recognized from her previous deployments. Whatever this task force was being assembled for, it involved serious business. The captains filed in after her, taking seats as far from her as the room allowed. Barnes closed the door and moved to the head of the table. Sarah sat at his right hand, the traditional place for the second-in-command. "Gentlemen, Major," Barnes began, "what I'm about to tell you is classified top secret. Nothing leaves this room." He pressed a button, and the projection screen lit up with images that made even Sarah's seasoned heart beat faster. 3 weeks ago, a Marine reconnaissance team went missing in the mountains of northern Syria. Their last transmission indicated they had discovered something of critical importance to national security. 48 hours ago, we received a distress signal from their emergency beacon. We believe at least some of them are still alive. Sarah studied the satellite images, already identifying approach routes, extraction points, danger zones. Major Mitchell has been brought in specifically for this rescue operation due to her extensive experience in similar situations. She will plan and lead the mission. You three will assist in your areas of expertise. Captain Reynolds, you'll handle logistics. Captain Landry, intelligence. Captain Ortiz, communications. Barnes turned to Sarah. Major, the floor is yours. Sarah stood and moved to the screen, her mind already running through scenarios, contingencies, requirements. This was what she had trained for, what she had lived for since the day she'd enlisted. The captain's earlier behavior was already forgotten, irrelevant to the task at hand. Our first priority is gathering all available intelligence, she began, her voice clear and authoritative. I need everything we have on the team's last known position, enemy activity in the area, terrain analysis, weather patterns for the next 2 weeks, and full personnel files on the missing Marines. She turned to face the captains directly. I need this information by 1800 hours today. Any questions? Reynolds raised his hand tentatively. Major, with all due respect, isn't this moving too quickly? Shouldn't we take more time to analyze the situation? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Every hour we delay reduces their chance of survival by approximately 8%. By this time tomorrow, that's a nearly 200% decrease in survival probability. Is that acceptable to you, Captain Reynolds? No, ma'am, he replied, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be seen. Good, then let's get to work. Those are our people out there, and we're bringing them home. As the briefing continued, Sarah noticed the captains watching her with a mixture of wariness and growing respect. She recognized the look. She'd seen it before, that moment when judgment gave way to recognition, when assumptions crumbled in the face of competence. By the time they broke for lunch, Captain Ortiz was asking earnest questions about communication protocols. Captain Landry was showing her intelligence reports he'd already begun gathering, and Captain Reynolds was still quiet, still processing the morning's events. Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come in the field, where lives would hang in the balance and decisions would have to be made in split seconds. But for now, she had established the first and most crucial element of leadership: respect. As they filed out of the briefing room, Colonel Barnes fell into step beside her. They're good officers, he said quietly, just a bit traditional in their thinking. Traditional is one word for it, Sarah replied. Barnes smiled slightly. They'll learn, just like I did when I first served under a female commander. He paused. That was 20 years ago, and she saved my life twice before our tour was over, changed my perspective permanently. Sarah nodded, appreciating his candor. The mission briefing continues at 600 tomorrow, she said. By then, I'll have a preliminary plan ready for review. I expected nothing less, Shadow Reaper, Barnes replied. Sarah watched him walk away, then headed toward her temporary quarters. There was work to do, lives to save, and perhaps, though it wasn't her primary concern, a few more minds to change. The officers' mess hall hummed with conversation as Sarah entered later that evening. She had spent the afternoon reviewing the files on the missing reconnaissance team, learning their backgrounds, their specialties, their faces. It was important to her that she know exactly who they were bringing home. The mess hall fell noticeably quieter as she walked to the food line. Word had clearly spread about the new major in charge of the rescue mission. Sarah felt the stares but ignored them, filling her tray with chicken, vegetables, and a cup of strong black coffee. She spotted an empty table in the corner and headed toward it, intending to eat quickly and return to work. Before she could reach it, however, a voice called out. Major Mitchell, join us. It was Captain Ortiz, seated at a table with several other officers she didn't recognize. Sarah hesitated, then changed course. Building rapport with her team was as important as planning the mission. Thank you, Captain, she said, setting her tray down. Ortiz made quick introductions, 2 lieutenants and a warrant officer who would be supporting the rescue operation. They nodded politely, curiosity evident in their expressions. We were just discussing the situation in Syria, Ortiz explained. Lieutenant Cooper here has some experience in the region. Cooper, a serious-looking woman with close-cropped blonde hair, leaned forward. I was attached to a joint task force near the Turkish border last year, ma'am. The terrain in that area is brutal. Steep mountains, narrow valleys, limited access routes. Sarah nodded. I noticed that in the satellite imagery. What can you tell me about local militia activity? As Cooper began describing the complex web of factions controlling different territories, Sarah found herself impressed by the young officer's knowledge. This was the kind of ground-level intelligence that could make or break a mission. Their discussion continued through dinner, with each officer contributing valuable insights. Only when they were finishing did Sarah notice Captain Reynolds watching from across the mess hall, his expression unreadable. "If you'll excuse me," she said, standing, "I have some more work to do before tomorrow's briefing." Instead of returning to her quarters, however, Sarah walked directly to Reynolds' table. The captain straightened as she approached. "A word, Captain?" she asked. Reynolds nodded stiffly and followed her to a quiet corner of the mess hall. "I noticed you didn't join the discussion," Sarah said without preamble. Reynolds' jaw tightened. "I didn't think my input would be welcome, given our introduction this morning." "This isn't about this morning, Captain. This is about bringing our people home alive." "With all due respect, Major, I'm not convinced you're the right person to lead this operation." Sarah studied him for a moment. At least he was being honest. "Because I'm a woman." "Because I don't know you," Reynolds countered. "You show up out of nowhere with a fancy call sign, and suddenly you're in charge of rescuing my friends." "Your friends?" Reynolds' expression softened slightly. "Staff Sergeant Ellis is the team leader. We served together in Iraq. He's godfather to my daughter." Understanding dawned. This wasn't just professional resistance, it was personal concern. "I didn't know," Sarah said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, just bring them home." "That's exactly what I intend to do, Captain, and I could use your help." Reynolds looked surprised. "My help?" "You know Ellis, how he thinks, how he operates. That kind of insight could be invaluable in planning this rescue." For the first time, Reynolds seemed to really look at her. Not as a woman, not as an unexpected superior, but as a Marine officer trying to accomplish a mission. "Ellis is smart," he said finally. "If anyone could keep a team alive behind enemy lines, it's him, but he's also stubborn. He won't abandon the objective, whatever they found out there." Sarah nodded. "Then we plan for extraction with the objective secured, whatever it is." "That complicates things." "It does, which is why I need my logistics officer fully engaged." Reynolds held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll have preliminary equipment and transportation requirements on your desk by 500 tomorrow." "Thank you, Captain." As Reynolds walked away, Sarah felt a small measure of satisfaction. She hadn't won him over completely, but it was a start. More importantly, she had gained valuable information about the mission. She returned to her quarters, a Spartan room with a bed, desk, and small bathroom. Sitting at the desk, she opened her laptop and continued working on the rescue plan, incorporating the new insights from dinner. Hours passed as she worked, the base growing quieter outside her window. Just after midnight, a knock at her door interrupted her concentration. "Enter," she called. Colonel Barnes stepped in, looking as alert as he had that morning despite the late hour. "Still at it, I see." Sarah gestured to the laptop, just finalizing the initial plan. Barnes nodded approvingly. "That's why I requested you specifically for this mission. Your reputation for thoroughness precedes you." "My reputation seems to precede me in several ways," Sarah remarked dryly. Barnes smiled slightly. "Shadow Reaper, the name carries weight." "Sometimes too much weight." "Perhaps, but in this case, it might be useful." Barnes sat in the room's only other chair. "The team we're rescuing, they're part of a specialized unit tasked with monitoring chemical weapons movement along the Syrian-Turkish border." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her mind was racing with the implications. "So whatever they found could be very dangerous in the wrong hands," Barnes finished. "Which is why this isn't just a rescue mission, it's potentially much more." "You should have told me this earlier." "I'm telling you now, and only you." Barnes leaned forward. "The fewer people who know the full scope, the better." Sarah understood the need for compartmentalization, but she didn't like it. I can't plan effectively if I don't have all the information. I know, that's why I'm here now. Barnes handed her a small USB drive. Everything we know is on this. Review it tonight. We'll discuss in the morning before the briefing. Sarah took the drive, her mind already adjusting the rescue plan to account for this new information. Get some sleep, Major, Barnes said, standing. Tomorrow will be a long day. After he left, Sarah plugged the drive into her laptop. What she saw made her blood run cold. The reconnaissance team had discovered evidence of a new type of chemical agent being developed in a remote facility. Their last transmission included partial test results showing a compound more lethal than anything previously documented. Sarah worked through the night, revising her plan, calculating risks, identifying contingencies. By dawn, her eyes were burning with fatigue, but her mind was clear. This wasn't just about rescuing Marines anymore. It was about preventing a potential catastrophe. At 500, as promised, there was another knock at her door. This time it was Captain Reynolds, holding a thick folder. "Logistics report as requested," he said, noticing her obviously sleepless state but making no comment. "Thank you, Captain." Sarah took the folder. "I'll review this immediately. The briefing is still set for 600. Reynolds hesitated. "Major, I want to apologize for yesterday morning." Sarah waved away the apology. "Water under the bridge, Captain. We have more important things to focus on." "Yes, ma'am." Reynolds paused again. "Ellis's wife called me last night. She's worried sick." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Tell her we're coming for them, all of them." Something like hope flickered in Reynolds' eyes. "I will." After he left, Sarah showered and changed into a fresh uniform, her mind still working through the mission details. At 5:45, she gathered her materials and headed to Colonel Barnes' office for their pre-briefing discussion. Barnes was waiting for her, coffee in hand. "You look like you could use this," he said, offering her the cup. Sarah accepted it gratefully. "Thank you, sir." "Did you review the files?" "Yes, the situation is more serious than I initially thought." Barnes nodded grimly. "Much more serious. That's why I needed someone with your experience." He hesitated. "There's something else you should know, Major, something not in the files." Sarah waited, sensing that whatever was coming would complicate things further. "We have reason to believe there may be American involvement in the development of this chemical agent." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "American, military, or civilian?" "We're not sure, but if our people find evidence of U.S. citizens participating in developing illegal chemical weapons..." Barnes didn't need to finish the sentence. "It would be an international incident," Sarah concluded, "and a public relations nightmare for the Corps." "Exactly, which means this mission requires not just tactical skill, but discretion." Sarah took a long sip of coffee, processing this new complication. "Does anyone else know about this?" "No, and I'd like to keep it that way until we have confirmation." "Understood, but sir, if we're going in blind to a potentially compromised situation..." "I know the risks, Major, so do you. That's why you're here." Sarah nodded slowly. "We'll need specialized equipment for chemical detection and containment, and at least one team member with CBRN training." "Already arranged. Lieutenant Wilson from the CBRN Defense Unit will join your team. His paperwork shows him as a communications specialist." Sarah appreciated Barnes' thoroughness. "Good. What about extraction? If we're dealing with chemical agents, we can't risk contamination of the extraction vehicles." "I've secured authorization for a specialized CBRN response team to be on standby at the Turkish border. They'll have decontamination equipment ready." They continued discussing details until 5:55, when Barnes checked his watch. "Time for the briefing. Remember, Major, the chemical weapons information and potential American involvement stays between us for now." "Understood, sir." As they walked to the briefing room, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling firmly on her shoulders. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was potentially much more dangerous and much more complicated than anyone else in the room would know. She took a deep breath as Barnes opened the door. Inside, the 3 captains and several other officers were already seated, waiting expectantly. It was time to put her plan into action, a plan that now had layers within layers, just like the mission itself. The briefing room was silent as Sarah finished outlining the rescue plan. She had deliberately kept it focused on the primary objective, locating and extracting the missing reconnaissance team, while leaving out the more sensitive aspects of the mission. Only she, Colonel Barnes, and now Lieutenant Wilson knew about the chemical weapons angle. "Questions?" she asked, looking around the room. Captain Landry raised his hand. "Major, the insertion point you've chosen puts us nearly 15 kilometers from the last known position of the recon team. Wouldn't it make more sense to insert closer?" It was a good question, exactly the kind Sarah had expected. "The closer insertion points are too exposed," she explained. "Intelligence reports indicate increased militia activity in those areas. The 15-kilometer approach gives us better cover and multiple avenues of approach if we encounter resistance." Landry nodded, satisfied with the explanation. "Any other questions?" Sarah asked. Captain Reynolds spoke up. "The equipment list includes MOPP gear. Are we expecting chemical or biological threats?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. This was tricky territory. "It's standard precautionary equipment for the region, Captain. As you know, chemical weapons have been used in the Syrian conflict before." Reynolds seemed to accept this explanation, though Sarah could see suspicion in his eyes. He was sharp, perhaps too sharp for the partial truth she was providing. "If there are no other questions, we'll move to team assignments," she continued. "Captain Reynolds will lead Team Alpha with Lieutenants Cooper and Wilson. Captain Landry will lead Team Bravo with Lieutenants Martinez and Jackson. Captain Ortiz will coordinate communications from the forward operating base just inside the Turkish border. I'll be with Team Alpha." She paused, making eye contact with each team member. "We deploy in 24 hours. Use that time to study the terrain, review your equipment, and rest. This will be a high-risk operation with no room for error." Colonel Barnes stood. "I have complete confidence in Major Mitchell and in each of you. Bring our Marines home safely. Dismissed." As the officers filed out, Sarah noticed Reynolds lingering behind. She had expected this. "Something on your mind, Captain?" she asked when they were alone. Reynolds approached the map still displayed on the screen. "MOPP gear is heavy, restricts movement, and slows us down. If we're really just doing a standard rescue operation, it's excessive." Sarah considered her options. Reynolds was her team leader. She needed his trust. But she also had direct orders about information compartmentalization. "You're right," she admitted, "but I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it." Reynolds studied her face. "There's something you're not telling us." "There are always things I'm not telling you, Captain. That's the nature of command." "Is it something that could endanger my team?" "Everything about this mission could endanger your team," Sarah replied frankly. "We're going deep into hostile territory to extract Marines who may be wounded or dead. Nothing about that is safe." Reynolds didn't seem entirely satisfied, but he nodded. "Fair enough, but I need to know, are we likely to encounter chemical agents out there?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "It's a possibility we need to be prepared for. That's all I can say right now." After a moment of tension, Reynolds relaxed slightly. "Understood, Major. I'll make sure my team is ready." "Thank you, Captain." Sarah gathered her materials. "I'll be inspecting equipment at 1400 hours. Have your team assembled and ready." Once Reynolds had left, Sarah took a moment to collect her thoughts. The next 24 hours would be crucial for preparation, but they would also be dangerous in their own way. The more time passed before deployment, the more chances for questions, for doubts, for the kind of scrutiny that might reveal the mission's true nature. She needed to keep everyone focused and busy. At 1400 hours sharp, Sarah arrived at the equipment bay where both teams were assembled with their gear laid out for inspection. She moved methodically from item to item, checking weapons, communications equipment, medical supplies, and the controversial MOPP gear. "Lieutenant Wilson," she said, approaching the chemical warfare specialist who was ostensibly there as a communications expert. "A word, please." They moved to a quiet corner of the bay. "Have you had a chance to review the special equipment?" she asked quietly. Wilson nodded. "Yes, ma'am. The detection devices are state-of-the-art. They'll identify any known chemical agent within seconds of exposure." "And the containment equipment?" "Designed for rapid deployment and secure transport. If we find what we think is out there, we can package it safely for extraction." "Good," Sarah paused. "What's your assessment of the team?" Wilson glanced back at the others. Solid professionals. Reynolds knows his stuff. Cooper seems exceptionally sharp, but they don't know what they're really walking into. They know enough, Sarah said firmly. Focus on your role, Lieutenant. When the time comes, they'll adapt. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Sarah met with each team member individually, assessing their readiness and addressing any concerns. She reviewed satellite imagery and intelligence reports, looking for any changes that might affect their plan. She even managed to squeeze in 2 hours of sleep before their scheduled departure at 400. As she lay on her bunk, eyes closed but mind racing, Sarah thought about the missing Marines. What had they discovered in those remote mountains? Were they still alive? And if they were, what condition would they be in after nearly a month in hostile territory? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at her door. "Enter," she called, sitting up. It was Captain Ortiz, looking troubled. "Sorry to disturb you, Major, but there's something you should see." Sarah followed him to the communications center, where a satellite feed was displaying real-time imagery of their target area. "This came in 20 minutes ago," Ortiz explained, pointing to the screen. "Increased vehicle movement around this village, just 3 kilometers from our primary search zone." Sarah studied the images. At least a dozen vehicles, some military, some civilian, were gathered in what appeared to be the village center. "Could be nothing," Ortiz continued. "Local militia meeting maybe, but the timing concerns me." Sarah's instincts were sending warning signals. Have we seen this level of activity in the area before? Not according to historical imagery, no. This is new. How long until we deploy? 3 hours and 17 minutes, ma'am. Sarah made a quick decision. Move up the timeline. I want wheels up in 90 minutes. Ortiz's eyes widened slightly. That's cutting prep time short. Better short prep than walking into an ambush, Captain. Make it happen. As Ortiz hurried off to implement the new timeline, Sarah continued studying the satellite imagery. Something about this didn't feel right. The sudden increase in activity, the gathering of forces, it suggested their operation might be compromised. But how? The mission was closely guarded, known only to those directly involved. Unless someone else was also looking for the missing Marines, or more specifically, looking for what the Marines had found. Sarah quickly made her way to Colonel Barnes' quarters, waking him with an urgent knock. "Sir," she said when he appeared at the door, somehow looking fully alert despite the hour. "We may have a problem." After explaining the situation, she waited as Barnes considered the implications. "You think someone else is after the chemical weapons data," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir, the timing is too coincidental." Barnes nodded grimly. "I agree, but moving up the timeline has its own risks. Greater than the risk of someone else finding our people first." "Point taken," Barnes thought for a moment. "Do it. But Major, if someone else is looking for the same thing we are, this just got even more complicated." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Barnes' pale eyes seemed to see right through her. "Because if you encounter opposition out there, you'll have to make choices, hard choices." Sarah understood exactly what he meant. "The mission comes first, sir, always." "Good," Barnes checked his watch. "I'll meet you at the airfield in an hour." 83 minutes later, Sarah stood on the tarmac watching as her teams boarded the modified Black Hawk helicopters that would carry them to the staging area near the Turkish-Syrian border. From there, they would cross into Syria using ground transportation, then proceed on foot to the insertion point. Captain Reynolds approached, his gear already loaded. "Ready, Major." "Always, Captain." Reynolds hesitated, then said, "My team noticed the accelerated timeline. They're professional enough not to ask, but they know something's up." "Tell them to stay focused on their tasks," Sarah replied. "All will become clear when it needs to." Reynolds didn't look entirely satisfied, but he nodded and turned to board the helicopter. Sarah followed, securing herself in a seat near the door where she could watch the pre-dawn landscape pass beneath them. As the rotors spun up and the helicopter lifted off, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with every mission. But this time, there was something else too, a nagging sense that they were rushing headlong into a situation even more dangerous than they had planned for. The flight to the staging area took just under 3 hours. They landed at a small, unmarked airfield just inside Turkey, where ground transportation was waiting. After transferring their equipment and receiving a final weather and intelligence update, they boarded the modified trucks that would take them to the border. "Last communication check," Sarah ordered as they approached the crossing point. "Radio discipline from this point forward. Hand signals and prearranged codes only unless absolutely necessary." Everyone acknowledged, checking their communications equipment one final time. The tension in the vehicles was palpable, the quiet, focused tension of professionals about to enter a high-risk environment. As they crossed into Syria, moving carefully along a rarely used smuggling route, Sarah watched the rugged landscape unfold before them. Steep mountains, narrow valleys, scattered vegetation offering minimal cover, exactly as Lieutenant Cooper had described. They drove as far as they dared, then concealed the vehicles and continued on foot. The sun was high now, beating down mercilessly as they moved in formation toward their insertion point. Despite the heat, everyone remained alert, scanning constantly for any sign of threat. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the position where they would split into their separate teams. Sarah gathered everyone for a final briefing. "Team Bravo will establish the observation post here," she said, pointing to a ridge overlooking the valley where the reconnaissance team had last been reported. "Team Alpha will proceed to the primary search area. If we haven't made contact within 24 hours, implement the secondary plan as briefed." Captain Landry nodded, his expression serious. "Understood, Major." Sarah turned to Reynolds and the rest of Team Alpha. "Move out in 5 minutes. Check your MOPP gear one last time." As the teams made their final preparations, Lieutenant Wilson approached Sarah. "Detection equipment is online and calibrated," he reported quietly. "Range is limited. We'll need to be within 50 meters of any chemical agent to get a reading." "Let's hope that's close enough," Sarah replied. 5 minutes later, Team Alpha moved out, leaving Team Bravo to establish their observation post. Sarah took point, leading them along a route that provided maximum cover while still allowing for rapid movement. Reynolds followed close behind, with Cooper and Wilson bringing up the rear. They moved in silence, communicating only with hand signals when necessary. The terrain was as challenging as expected: steep inclines, loose rock, narrow passages that forced them into single file. After 2 hours of careful movement, they reached a position overlooking a small valley. According to their intelligence, this was where the reconnaissance team had been operating when they went missing. Sarah signaled for everyone to take cover while she surveyed the area through binoculars. The valley seemed deserted, no sign of human activity, recent or otherwise. Reynolds crawled up beside her. "See anything?" he whispered. "Nothing obvious," Sarah replied, "but they wouldn't have stayed in the open." She continued scanning methodically, looking for any anomaly, any sign that Marines had passed through this area. After several minutes, she spotted something, a flash of color that didn't belong among the browns and grays of the rocky landscape. "There," she said, pointing. 2 o'clock, about 700 meters. Reynolds followed her direction. Could be trash, could be equipment. Only one way to find out. Sarah signaled for the team to advance toward the unidentified object, maintaining cover and moving in leapfrog fashion to ensure they were never all exposed at once. As they drew closer, the object became clearer, a piece of fabric caught on a thorn bush, a very specific shade of fabric. "Marine issue," Reynolds confirmed when they reached it. "Part of a uniform." Sarah examined the area around the bush. Footprints, at least 4 distinct patterns heading east. She looked in that direction. The valley narrowed into a rocky corridor that led toward a cluster of low buildings barely visible in the distance. "The village," Wilson said, checking his map. "The one with the increased activity." Sarah made a quick decision. "We follow the tracks, but we approach the village with extreme caution. If that's where they are, that's also where whoever else is looking for them might be." As they moved eastward, following the increasingly clear signs of the missing Marine's passage, Sarah felt her instincts sharpening. They were getting close, not just to the missing team, but to whatever they had discovered. And based on the satellite imagery, they weren't the only ones. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the valley. Soon they would have the cover of darkness, but also the challenges that came with night operations. Sarah checked her watch. They had been on the move for nearly 5 hours since splitting from Team Bravo. It was time for a scheduled check-in. She signaled for the team to take cover, then activated her secure radio for the briefest possible transmission. "Bravo, this is Alpha, status check." After a moment of static, Landry's voice came through, barely audible. "Alpha, Bravo, all clear at observation post. No movement observed in your sector." "Understood, Alpha continuing as planned. Next check-in at 2200. Sarah switched off the radio and turned to her team. "We continue toward the village. We'll use the darkness for closer observation before deciding on next steps." Reynolds looked concerned. "If our people are in that village, extracting them won't be easy." "No," Sarah agreed, "but that's why we're here, because we do the things that aren't easy." As they prepared to move out, Lieutenant Wilson suddenly held up his hand. The chemical detection device on his wrist was flashing a silent warning. Sarah's blood went cold. "What is it?" Wilson checked the readout, his expression grim. "Trace elements of an organophosphate compound, very faint but definitely present." "Chemical weapons?" Reynolds breathed, finally understanding the reason for the MOPP gear. "Possibly," Sarah acknowledged, "or possibly something worse." The setting sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Team Alpha discussed their next move. The detection of chemical traces had changed the situation dramatically, confirming Sarah's suspicions while raising new concerns. "We need to approach this carefully," she said, gathering her team in the shelter of a large boulder. "The detection device picked up only trace amounts, which means the main source is likely still contained." "Or it means most of it has already been moved," Reynolds countered. "Those vehicles we spotted could be transporting it right now." Sarah considered this possibility. "Either way, our priority remains finding the reconnaissance team." Lieutenant Wilson checked his equipment again. "The trace elements are consistent with a new generation of nerve agents, similar to VX, but with modifications that would make it resistant to current antidotes." Cooper's eyes widened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "So if we're exposed—" "Standard atropine injectors won't work," Wilson confirmed. "I have specialized countermeasures, but only limited doses." Sarah made a quick decision. "We proceed to MOPP Level 2. This meant wearing their protective overgarments and boots, but keeping masks and gloves ready to don at a moment's notice. As they adjusted their equipment, Reynolds moved closer to Sarah. "You knew about this from the beginning," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I knew it was a possibility," Sarah replied, "and now we have confirmation." "You should have told us." "Would it have changed how you prepared, how you approached the mission?" Reynolds considered this, then reluctantly shook his head. "No, but I don't like being kept in the dark." "Noted, Captain. Now focus on the mission." They moved out again, advancing cautiously toward the village. The chemical detection device remained active, showing low-level contamination but no dangerous concentrations. As darkness fell completely, they used night vision equipment to navigate the increasingly difficult terrain. About a kilometer from the village, Sarah signaled for them to stop. Ahead, barely visible even with night vision, was a checkpoint, two vehicles blocking a narrow part of the road with armed men standing guard. "Not local militia," Cooper whispered after studying them through her scope. "Their equipment is too standardized, military training based on their positioning." "Syrian army?" Reynolds asked. "Maybe, or mercenaries." Sarah studied the checkpoint, looking for weaknesses. There were at least 6 guards visible, all armed with assault rifles. Bypassing them would be difficult in the confined space of the valley. "We need more intelligence before we proceed," she decided. "Cooper, work your way around to the ridge on the left. Get eyes on the village itself. See what we're dealing with." "Yes, ma'am." "Wilson, continue monitoring for chemical signatures. If the levels increase, we go to MOPP 3 immediately." "Understood." "Reynolds, you're with me. We'll establish a position closer to the checkpoint, look for patterns in their security." They split up, moving silently in the darkness. Sarah and Reynolds found a concealed position about 200 meters from the checkpoint, close enough to observe but far enough to remain undetected. 6 guards at the checkpoint," Reynolds whispered after several minutes of observation. "Rotation every 30 minutes, 2 vehicles with mounted weapons, older model DSHK heavy machine guns." Sarah nodded, adding these details to her mental map of the situation. "Professional setup. These aren't local fighters. They continued watching for nearly an hour, noting the guards' routines and communication patterns. Just as Sarah was about to suggest they return to the others, her secure radio vibrated with an incoming transmission. "Alpha Lead, this is Alpha 3, came Cooper's voice, barely audible even through the earpiece. "Go ahead, 3. Village is occupied by approximately 20 to 30 armed personnel. Multiple vehicles, including 2 that appear to be transport trucks. Building in the center shows signs of being converted to a temporary laboratory. Several individuals in what look like hazmat suits entering and exiting." Sarah's mind raced, processing this information. Any sign of our missing personnel? A brief pause. Negative visual confirmation, but there's a smaller building on the eastern edge with guards posted. Could be holding detainees. Understood, return to Rally Point Alpha. We'll meet you there. Sarah turned to Reynolds. Time to regroup and form a new plan. They made their way back to their temporary hiding place, arriving just before Cooper returned from her reconnaissance. Once the team was together again, Sarah laid out what they knew. "We're looking at a well-organized operation," she began. "Professional personnel, laboratory setup, possible detention facility. All signs point to this being connected to the chemical agent our recon team discovered. If they're still alive, they're probably in that guarded building Cooper saw," Reynolds said. "Agreed, but extracting them won't be simple. We're outnumbered at least 7-1, and that's assuming we don't face reinforcements." Wilson checked his detection equipment. "Chemical signatures are definitely stronger toward the village. Whatever they're working with is concentrated there." Sarah considered their options. A frontal assault was out of the question with their limited numbers. Stealth infiltration would be challenging given the security measures in place. They needed a third option. "Lieutenant Wilson," she said, "in your assessment, what would happen if that laboratory were to be compromised, say, by an explosion or fire?" Wilson thought for a moment. "Depends on the containment protocols they're using. Best case, minimal release of agents. Worst case." "A catastrophic release," Sarah finished, "affecting everyone in the immediate vicinity." Reynolds caught on immediately. "You're thinking of creating a diversion." "I'm thinking of giving them a more immediate problem to deal with than guarding prisoners," Sarah corrected. "If they believe their chemical agents are at risk, they'll prioritize securing or moving them. Which could create an opportunity for us to reach the detention building," Cooper added, following the logic. "Exactly," Sarah turned back to Wilson. "How close would we need to get to place explosives effectively?" "Within 50 meters of the lab building, ideally. But Major, this is extremely risky, if those chemicals are released in significant quantities." "We'll all be in MOPP-4 before we make our move," Sarah assured him. "And we're not looking to cause a major release, just enough of a threat to create confusion and divert attention." Reynolds looked skeptical. "That's threading a very fine needle." "Do you have a better suggestion, Captain?" Sarah asked directly. After a moment's consideration, Reynolds shook his head. "No, ma'am, I don't." "Then we proceed with planning. Cooper, draw up what you saw, building locations, guard positions, approach routes. Wilson, prepare the explosive charges and brief us on exactly where they need to be placed for maximum effect with minimal chemical release. Reynolds, work out our extraction route once we have our people." As her team got to work, Sarah contacted Team Bravo to update them on the situation and adjust the extraction plan. They would need to move to a secondary pickup point closer to the village, ready to provide covering fire if necessary. The next hour was spent in intense preparation. Cooper's detailed sketches gave them a clear picture of the target area. Wilson prepared 3 small explosive devices, carefully calibrating them to create more noise and light than actual destructive force. Reynolds mapped out multiple extraction routes depending on various scenarios. Finally, Sarah gathered them for a final briefing. "We move in 1 hour at 200. That gives us the advantage of hitting them when alertness is lowest. We go in at MOPP level 4, full protection. Cooper and Wilson will place the explosive charges at these 3 points around the laboratory building. Reynolds and I will take up position near the detention facility. Once the charges detonate, we move in during the confusion." She looked at each team member in turn. "Our primary objective is extracting our personnel. Secondary objective is gathering intelligence on the chemical agents. Under no circumstances do we engage in extended firefights if avoidable. Questions. What's the rally point after extraction? Reynolds asked. This ridge 2 kilometers east, Sarah pointed to their map. Team Bravo will meet us there with transportation. And if our people are wounded, unable to move quickly? Cooper inquired. We've prepared for that possibility, Sarah replied. The medical kits include field stretchers if needed. Wilson raised his hand. If we confirm presence of the chemical agents, do we attempt to secure samples? This was a crucial question, one that touched on the classified aspects of their mission. Sarah chose her words carefully. Only if it can be done without compromising the extraction. I've included specialized containment equipment in our gear for that purpose. With the plan set, they began their final preparations. Sarah helped each team member check their MOPP gear, ensuring proper seals and functioning equipment. Chemical protection suits were hot, restrictive, and reduced visibility and dexterity, all factors they would need to overcome during the operation. As the designated hour approached, Sarah took a moment for personal reflection. The risks they were about to take were enormous, not just to themselves, but potentially to everyone in the area if the chemical agents were released. Yet the stakes demanded action. If these weapons reached the open market, countless lives could be lost. Time to move, she said finally, securing her mask and checking the seal one last time. They advanced toward the village using a dry streambed for cover, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid detection. The checkpoint remained in place, but Sarah had identified a narrow path that would allow them to bypass it by climbing a steep, rocky slope. The climb was grueling, especially in full MOPP gear. Sweat poured down Sarah's face inside her mask, and her breathing sounded unnaturally loud in her ears. But they made it past the checkpoint undetected, descending back into the valley closer to the village. At the final approach point, Sarah split the team as planned. Cooper, Wilson, you have 30 minutes to place the charges. Radio confirmation when in position. Yes, ma'am, they replied in unison before moving toward their targets. Sarah and Reynolds proceeded toward the detention building, using the shadows of other structures for cover. They encountered one patrol, but managed to remain hidden until it passed. In position, Sarah whispered into her radio once they had reached a small outbuilding approximately 50 meters from their target. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Sarah was beginning to worry when her radio finally vibrated. Charges placed, came Cooper's voice. In position for detonation. Understood, Sarah replied. Detonate on my mark. She turned to Reynolds. Ready. He checked his weapon one last time and nodded. Ready. Sarah took a deep breath. Execute in 3, 2, 1, mark. The night erupted in a series of flashes and concussions as the charges detonated in sequence. Even through her protective mask, Sarah could feel the pressure waves. Almost immediately, alarms began to sound and shouts of confusion filled the air. Move, she ordered, and she and Reynolds sprinted toward the detention building. As predicted, most of the guards were running toward the laboratory, where smoke was now billowing into the night sky. Only 2 remained at the detention facility, and they were looking toward the commotion rather than watching for approach from behind. Sarah and Reynolds took them down silently, quick, efficient strikes that left the guards unconscious but alive. Reynolds secured their weapons while Sarah checked the building's door. It was locked, but with a simple padlock that she quickly broke with a small pry tool. Cover me, she whispered, pulling the door open and stepping inside. The building was dark and smelled of mold and human waste. Sarah activated the flashlight attached to her weapon, sweeping its beam across the interior. There were 3 cells, divided by metal bars. In the farthest one, huddled figures stirred at the sudden light. U.S. Marines, Sarah called out. We're here to extract you. A hoarse voice replied from the darkness. About damn time. Sarah moved quickly to the cell, examining the lock. This one was more substantial, a heavy-duty mechanism that would require keys or serious tools to breach. Reynolds, she called, check the guards for keys. While Reynolds searched the unconscious guards, Sarah counted the prisoners. 4 men, all wearing tattered remains of Marine uniforms. They looked thin and battered but alive. Staff Sergeant Ellis, she asked. A man with a wild beard and a badly bruised face stepped forward. That's me. Who are you? Major Mitchell. We'll have plenty of time for introductions once we get you out of here. Reynolds returned with a ring of keys. Got them. It took 3 tries to find the right key, but finally the cell door swung open. Sarah quickly assessed the Marines' condition. They were malnourished and showed signs of having been beaten, but they could all walk. "Can you move?" she asked Ellis. "Try and stop us," he replied grimly. "Then follow me. We have an extraction team waiting, but we need to move fast." As they exited the building, Sarah could see that their diversion had worked, perhaps too well. The laboratory building was now fully engulfed in flames, and personnel were frantically moving equipment and what appeared to be sealed containers into the transport trucks. "Wilson, Cooper, rendezvous at extraction point now," Sarah ordered into her radio. "Already moving," came Cooper's reply. "But we have company vehicle approaching from the North Road." Sarah's mind raced. Reinforcements would complicate their escape significantly. "Double time to the extraction point," she ordered. "Reynolds, take point with Ellis and his team. I'll cover the rear." They moved as quickly as the rescued Marines could manage, staying in the shadows and avoiding open ground. Sarah kept glancing back, watching for pursuit. So far, the chaos around the burning laboratory was keeping attention focused there, but that wouldn't last long. They had covered about half the distance to their extraction point when Wilson's voice came over the radio, tight with urgency. "Major detecting significant chemical release, levels rising rapidly." Sarah felt a surge of alarm. This wasn't part of the plan. "Source?" "The transport trucks. I think one of the containers was damaged in the rush to evacuate." This changed everything. If a significant amount of the agent was released, it could affect not just the village but potentially spread to neighboring areas depending on wind patterns. New plan, Sarah decided. Reynolds continue with the extraction, get Ellis and his team to the rally point. "What about you?" Reynolds demanded. "I'm going to rendezvous with Wilson and Cooper. We need to contain that release if possible." "Major, that's..." "An order, Captain. Move out now." Sarah could tell Reynolds wanted to argue, but his discipline held. "Yes, ma'am. Be careful." As Reynolds led the rescued Marines toward the extraction point, Sarah headed back toward the village, radioing Wilson and Cooper to meet her at a designated location. Within minutes, they had rejoined her. "Situation?" she asked. Wilson checked his detection equipment. "Chemical concentration is increasing. Wind is carrying it southeast, away from our extraction route, fortunately, but toward populated areas." "Can we neutralize it?" Wilson shook his head. "Not with what we have, but we might be able to limit the spread." "How?" "The truck containing the leaking container. If we can immobilize it, the response team can focus containment efforts there rather than chasing a moving source." Sarah quickly processed this information. "So we disable the truck." Cooper adjusted her grip on her weapon. "There are at least 10 armed personnel around those vehicles." "Then we'll need to be creative," Sarah replied. "Wilson, give me one of the remaining charges." Wilson handed over a small explosive device similar to the ones they had used earlier. Sarah examined it briefly, then outlined her plan. "We circle around to approach from the south. The confusion should still be high enough that we can get close. We place the charge under the lead transport truck, not to destroy it, just to disable it. Once it detonates, we fall back immediately to the extraction point." It was a high-risk plan, but the alternatives were worse. If that truck left the area with leaking chemical agents, the consequences could be catastrophic. They moved out, working their way around the perimeter of the village to approach the trucks from the least guarded direction. The fire at the laboratory was still burning, providing both cover for their movement and continued distraction for most of the personnel. As they drew closer, Sarah could see people in hazmat suits similar to their own MOPP gear hurriedly loading the last containers into the second truck. The first truck was already fully loaded and had its engine running. "We need to move fast," she whispered. "That lead truck is ready to depart." Using the smoke and shadows for cover, they crept to within 50 meters of the vehicles. Sarah could now see armed guards, but they were focused outward, watching for external threats rather than looking at the area immediately around the trucks. "Cooper, watch our backs," she ordered. "Wilson with me." Sarah and Wilson crawled forward, using a drainage ditch for cover until they were within 10 meters of the lead truck. From here, they would have to cross open ground to reach their target. "Wait for my signal," Sarah whispered. "When the next group of containers is brought out, they'll be focused on loading. That's our window." They didn't have to wait long. Moments later, 4 men in hazmat suits emerged from a nearby building carrying a sealed metal container between them. As predicted, attention shifted to this delicate operation. "Now," Sarah hissed, and they sprinted the short distance to the truck. They reached the underside of the vehicle without being spotted. Wilson quickly attached the explosive charge to a vulnerable point in the transmission while Sarah kept watch. It was done in seconds. "Fall back," she ordered, and they began their retreat. They had almost reached Cooper's position when shouts erupted behind them. They had been spotted. "Run," Sarah commanded, abandoning stealth for speed. Gunfire erupted, bullets kicking up dirt around them as they ran. Sarah returned fire briefly, not aiming to hit anyone but to force their pursuers to take cover. "Detonator," she called to Wilson once they had reached a relatively protected position behind a low stone wall. Wilson handed her the remote trigger. Without hesitation, Sarah activated it. The explosion was perfectly calibrated, powerful enough to destroy the truck's transmission, but not so powerful as to rupture the cargo area. The vehicle lurched forward a few feet and then stopped dead, smoke pouring from underneath. "Mission accomplished," Sarah said grimly. "Now let's get out of here." They ran toward the extraction point, pursued by several armed men, but managing to stay ahead thanks to their head start. As they approached the ridge where Reynolds should be waiting with the rescued Marines, Sarah radioed ahead. "Approaching extraction point. Have 4+ hostiles in pursuit." "Understood," came Reynolds' voice. "We're in position to provide covering fire." When they were within 100 meters of the ridge, Reynolds and 2 of the healthier rescued Marines opened fire from concealed positions, forcing their pursuers to fall back. Sarah, Wilson, and Cooper scrambled up the slope to join them. Team Bravo was waiting as planned with their transportation, 2 rugged off-road vehicles capable of navigating the difficult terrain back to the border. "Everyone accounted for?" Sarah asked Reynolds. "All present, Major. Ellis and his team are in rough shape but mobile." "Then let's move out." Wilson, final chemical reading. Wilson checked his equipment. Levels dropping. "The containment seems to be holding for now. Turkish authorities have been alerted through our command channels." Sarah nodded, satisfied that they had done everything possible to mitigate the chemical threat. Now their priority was getting the rescued Marines to safety and medical attention. As they boarded the vehicles, Staff Sergeant Ellis approached her. Despite his weakened condition, his eyes were alert and evaluating. "Major," he said, his voice still raspy from weeks of captivity. "Thank you, but there's something you should know about what we found out there." Sarah met his gaze. "I know about the chemical weapons, Sergeant." Ellis shook his head slowly. "It's worse than that, much worse. It's who's behind it." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the pre-dawn air. "Tell me on the way. We need to move now." As their vehicles sped through the darkness toward the Turkish border, Ellis leaned close so only Sarah could hear him over the engine noise. "We were tracking the chemical weapons movement as ordered," he began. "But we found documentation, evidence that the funding and technical specifications came from a corporation based in Virginia, a defense contractor with deep Pentagon connections." Sarah's mind flashed back to Colonel Barnes' warning about potential American involvement. He had suspected, but now they had confirmation. "Do you have this evidence?" she asked urgently. Ellis tapped his temple. "Up here, they took our equipment, but I memorized the key details. Names, dates, transaction amounts, enough to start an investigation." Sarah processed this information quickly. If what Ellis was saying was true, this went beyond a simple rescue mission or even containment of illegal weapons. This was potentially a major scandal involving corruption at the highest levels of the defense establishment. "We'll deal with that once we're safely back across the border," she told Ellis. "For now, save your strength." As their vehicles bounced over the rough terrain, Sarah radioed ahead to the extraction team waiting at the border, confirming their approach and the need for immediate medical attention for the rescued Marines. The sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn as they reached the border crossing. A remote, unmarked point that had been secured in advance by Turkish special forces working in coordination with the American military. Once across, medical personnel immediately attended to Ellis and his team, while Sarah debriefed with the extraction team leader. "Mission successful," she reported. 4 Marines extracted, chemical threat temporarily contained. Request immediate transport back to base for full debrief with Colonel Barnes. "Already arranged, Major," the team leader replied. "Transport arrives in 20 minutes." Sarah found a quiet moment to check in with her team. Reynolds, Cooper, and Wilson looked exhausted but satisfied, the unique expression of those who had accomplished something difficult and important. "Good work, all of you," she said simply. "What you did tonight saved lives, not just the Marines we extracted, but potentially many more who would have been affected by those weapons." Reynolds nodded, a new respect visible in his eyes. "Permission to speak freely, Major." "Granted. I was wrong about you. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. It won't happen again." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Apology accepted, Captain, and for what it's worth, your performance tonight was exemplary. Ellis speaks highly of you." "You've talked to Ellis already?" "Briefly, we have. Additional complications to deal with once we return to base." Reynolds raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. He understood the nature of compartmentalized information better now. The promised transport, a military helicopter, arrived right on schedule. As they boarded, Sarah took one last look at the mountains where they had just operated. Somewhere in those remote valleys, people were still dealing with the aftermath of their raid, containing chemical agents, treating injuries, perhaps planning retaliation. But they had accomplished what they set out to do. They had brought their people home. As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah allowed herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. The mission wasn't completely over. Ellis's information would need to be processed, reports written, debriefings conducted, but the most dangerous part was behind them. Or so she thought. The helicopter touched down at Camp Lejeune 22 hours later, after a series of transfers and a refueling stop. Sarah had managed a few hours of restless sleep during the journey, but her mind kept returning to Staff Sergeant Ellis's revelation. American involvement in developing illegal chemical weapons was the kind of bombshell that could have far-reaching consequences, not just for those directly involved, but for international relations and the reputation of the armed forces as a whole. Colonel Barnes was waiting on the tarmac as they disembarked. His face was unreadable as he approached Sarah. "Major Mitchell, well done on the extraction." "Thank you, sir. The rescued Marines are being transferred to the medical facility for treatment and evaluation." Barnes nodded. "I'd like a full debrief in 1 hour, just you for now." "Yes, sir, there are some sensitive matters we need to discuss." Barnes' expression flickered slightly. "I suspected as much. My office 800 hours. As Barnes walked away, Captain Reynolds approached Sarah. "Major, the team is heading to get some food and rest. Care to join us?" Sarah was tempted. The camaraderie after a successful mission was something special, but she needed time to organize her thoughts before meeting with Barnes. "Another time, Captain. I have preparations to make for the debriefing." Reynolds nodded, then hesitated. "Whatever Ellis told you, it's big, isn't it?" Sarah met his gaze. "Big enough that I can't discuss it, not yet." "Understood." Reynolds straightened slightly. "It was an honor serving with you, Major." "Likewise, Captain." After Reynolds left, Sarah headed to her quarters to shower and change. The hot water washed away the physical grime of the mission, but did nothing for the weight of responsibility she still carried. Ellis's information needed to be handled carefully, documented, verified, and then presented through the proper channels. At precisely 800 hours, she knocked on Colonel Barnes' office door. "Enter," came his voice from inside. Barnes was seated behind his desk, reviewing documents that he quickly set aside as she entered. "Take a seat, Major." Sarah sat, nodding that Barnes had closed the blinds, and there was a white noise generator humming softly in the corner. Precautions against eavesdropping. "I've reviewed your preliminary report," Barnes began. "Excellent work under difficult circumstances. The rescue of Ellis and his team alone would make this a successful operation, but you also managed to contain a potentially catastrophic chemical release." "Thank you, sir, but there's more you need to know." "I assumed as much. Proceed." Sarah took a deep breath. According to Staff Sergeant Ellis, his team discovered evidence of American involvement in the development of those chemical weapons. Specifically, a defense contractor based in Virginia with connections to the Pentagon. Barnes' expression remained neutral, but Sarah noticed his hands tighten slightly on the arms of his chair. Did Ellis provide specifics? Yes, sir. Names, dates, transaction amounts. He memorized key details after their equipment was confiscated. And you believe him? Ellis is a decorated Marine with an impeccable record. I have no reason to doubt his account. Barnes nodded slowly. I see. He was silent for a moment, then asked, has Ellis shared this information with anyone else? Not to my knowledge. He understood the sensitivity. Good. Barnes stood and walked to the window, adjusting the blinds to peer out. This puts us in a delicate position, Major. Sir? Barnes turned back to face her. Information like this needs to be handled with extreme care, through proper channels, following protocol. Something about his tone put Sarah on alert. It was too measured, too careful. Of course, sir. I assume that means reporting directly to Naval Criminal Investigative Service, or perhaps the Inspector General's office. Barnes returned to his desk but remained standing. Eventually, yes. But first, we need to verify Ellis's claims. Conduct our own investigation to ensure we're not passing along flawed intelligence. Sarah's instincts were now definitely sending warning signals. With respect, sir, that's not standard procedure for allegations of this nature. Protocol dictates immediate reporting to independent investigative authorities. Barnes smiled slightly. You're very by the book, aren't you, Major? When it comes to matters of this importance, yes, sir, I am. The colonel sat down again, his pale eyes studying her. Tell me, what was the name of the defense contractor Ellis mentioned? Sarah hesitated. Something wasn't right. Ellis should provide that information directly during his official debriefing. Which I'll be conducting later today, Barnes countered. I'm simply asking for a preview to help me prepare. Sarah made a split-second decision. Helix Defense Systems, she said, inventing a name that sounded plausible. Based in Arlington, according to Ellis. Barnes nodded, showing no reaction. I see, and the names of the individuals involved. Now Sarah was certain something was wrong. Barnes was fishing for information in a way that violated proper investigative procedures, and his lack of reaction to a company name she had just made up was telling. I believe Ellis should provide those details directly, sir, to ensure accuracy. Barnes leaned back in his chair. Of course, Major, you're right to be cautious. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've had a long couple of days. Get some rest. I'll handle the debriefing with Ellis and his team. Sir, I'd like to be present for that debriefing. That won't be necessary. You're officially relieved from this operation as of now. Well done again, Major. Dismissed. Sarah stood, her mind racing. Something was very wrong, but she couldn't confront Barnes directly without evidence. She saluted crisply and left the office, her pace measured despite the urgency she felt. As soon as she was out of sight of Barnes' office, she changed direction, heading not toward her quarters, but to the medical facility where Ellis and his team were being treated. She needed to speak to Ellis before Barnes did. She arrived to find the medical wing's entrance guarded by two Marines she didn't recognize. They straightened as she approached. Major Mitchell, one of them said. I'm sorry, but this area is restricted at the moment. Colonel's orders. I'm here to check on the status of the Marines my team extracted, Sarah replied calmly. As their rescue operation commander, that's my responsibility. We understand, ma'am, but our orders were explicit. No visitors until further notice. Sarah nodded as if accepting this, then asked, Who gave this order? Colonel Barnes personally. Yes, ma'am, about 30 minutes ago. That confirmed her suspicions. Barnes had moved quickly to isolate Ellis and his team. But why? The most obvious explanation was deeply troubling. Barnes might be connected to whatever Ellis had discovered. Sarah walked away, maintaining a casual pace until she was out of sight of the guards. Then she quickened her steps, heading toward the officers' quarters where her team would be resting. She found Reynolds in the common area, nursing a cup of coffee. Captain, I need a word, privately. Something in her tone must have conveyed the urgency, because Reynolds immediately stood and followed her to a quiet corner. We may have a problem, Sarah said in a low voice. Ellis and his team are under guard, isolated from contact. Colonel Barnes is personally handling their debriefing, and he just relieved me from the operation. Reynolds frowned. That seems unusual. It's more than unusual. It's a violation of standard procedure for handling potential criminal allegations involving defense contractors. Understanding dawned in Reynolds' eyes. You think Barnes is compromised? I don't know, but I'm not taking chances with Ellis's safety or his information. Sarah leaned closer. I need you to gather Cooper and Wilson. Meet me at Storage Building 3 in 20 minutes. Don't discuss this with anyone else. Reynolds nodded without hesitation. You got it, Major. 20 minutes later, Sarah had explained the situation to her team in the privacy of the seldom-used storage building. If Barnes is involved with whatever Ellis discovered, those Marines are in danger, she concluded. We need to reach them before anything happens. But they're under guard, Cooper pointed out. How do we get access? Sarah had been thinking about this problem since leaving Barnes' office. The medical facility has service corridors that connect to the main hospital building. If we can access those, we might be able to reach Ellis without confronting the guards directly. And if we're caught, Wilson asked, we'd be disobeying direct orders. If I'm wrong about Barnes, I'll take full responsibility, Sarah replied. But if I'm right and we do nothing, Ellis and his team could be silenced. The evidence of American involvement in illegal chemical weapons could disappear. Are you willing to take that chance? Her team exchanged glances, then Reynolds spoke for all of them. We're with you, Major. What's the plan? Sarah quickly outlined her approach. Using Wilson's medical background as a cover, they would enter the main hospital building legitimately, then access the service corridors to reach the restricted area where Ellis was being held. We move in 30 minutes, Sarah concluded. And remember, our goal is to reach Ellis and secure his testimony, not to confront Barnes or anyone else directly. As they prepared to execute the plan, Sarah felt the weight of what they were about to do. Circumventing a direct order from a superior officer was a serious offense. If she was wrong about Barnes, it could end her career. But if she was right. 30 minutes later, they were putting the plan into action. Wilson, wearing his medical corps insignia prominently, led them through the main hospital entrance with a clipboard of fabricated patient information. Once inside, they navigated to a service elevator that Cooper had identified on the building plans. Service corridors should be through here, Cooper whispered, indicating a nondescript door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Sarah tried the handle. It was unlocked. They slipped through into a utilitarian hallway with exposed pipes running along the ceiling. Medical wing should be 2 floors up and to the east, Cooper continued, consulting a small diagram she had sketched. They moved quickly but cautiously through the service corridors, encountering only one maintenance worker who barely glanced at them before continuing on his way. Sarah's pulse quickened as they approached the area where Ellis should be. Here, Cooper said, pointing to another unmarked door. This should put us in the restricted wing. Sarah pressed her ear to the door but heard nothing. Carefully, she eased it open a crack and peered through. The corridor beyond was empty. Clear, she whispered. Let's move. They entered the medical wing, immediately knotting the clinical silence. This area was surprisingly deserted for a facility that should be treating 4 recently rescued Marines. Room 212, Sarah murmured, reading the room assignments posted at the nurse's station. Ellis should be there. They moved down the hallway, alert for any sign of the guards or medical personnel. The silence was becoming increasingly unsettling. Room 212 had a small window in the door. Sarah peered through it and saw Ellis lying in a hospital bed, apparently asleep or sedated. No one else was visible in the room. She tried the door. It was unlocked. They slipped inside, closing it quietly behind them. Ellis, Sarah said softly, approaching the bed. Staff Sergeant Ellis. Ellis's eyes fluttered open. He looked groggy but recognized her immediately. Major Mitchell. We don't have much time, Sarah said. I need you to tell me exactly what you discovered about the American involvement in the chemical weapons program. Ellis struggled to sit up. They gave me something to help me sleep, they said, but it's making it hard to think. Fight through it, Sergeant. This is important. Ellis rubbed his face, visibly trying to clear his mind. The documents we found. They showed transfers from a company called Nexellen Industries to a shell corporation in Cyprus, which then funded the chemical research facility. Nexellen Industries, Sarah repeated, committing the name to memory. Based where? Virginia, McLean. They develop advanced weapons systems for the Pentagon. Ellis's voice was becoming stronger as he fought off the effects of whatever sedative he had been given. We found communications encrypted, but we managed to break the code. They were discussing something called Project Chimera. Who was involved? A man named Victor Keller. He's Nexellen's CEO, and there were emails to someone with a military address, a colonel. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Do you remember the name? Ellis nodded slowly. It was Barnes, Colonel Richard Barnes. The confirmation of her suspicions sent a chill through Sarah. Are you certain? Absolutely. I saw his signature on documents approving the transfer of technical specifications to the Cyprus company. Before Sarah could ask another question, the door to the room swung open. Two men in suits stood there, definitely not medical personnel. Major Mitchell, one of them said, you're in a restricted area without authorization. Sarah straightened, keeping herself between the men and Ellis. I'm checking on the welfare of Marines under my command. Your command of this operation has been terminated, the man replied coldly. I'm going to have to ask you and your team to leave immediately. And who exactly are you? Sarah demanded. The man produced an identification card. Special Agent Davis, Defense Intelligence Agency. This matter has been classified at the highest levels. Your presence here is a violation of national security protocols. Sarah didn't move. Defense intelligence has no jurisdiction over potential criminal activities by defense contractors or military personnel. That falls to NCIS or the Inspector General. Major Mitchell, the agent said, his tone hardening. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. You and your team will leave now, or you'll be placed under arrest for interfering with a classified investigation. Reynolds had moved to Sarah's side. Major, what do you want us to do? He asked quietly. Sarah made a split-second decision. We're leaving, she said loudly, then leaned down as if to say goodbye to Ellis and whispered, Stay alive. I'll get your information to the right people. Ellis gave an almost imperceptible nod. Sarah led her team out of the room, the agents following closely behind. Once they were in the corridor, Agent Davis said, You're all confined to quarters pending a security review. Interfering with a classified operation has serious consequences, Major. I'm aware of how the system works, Agent Davis, Sarah replied evenly, including the proper channels for reporting potential criminal activities by senior officers. Davis's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. I'll escort you back to your quarters myself. As they walked through the base, Sarah's mind was racing. Barnes was definitely involved in whatever illegal operation Nexellen Industries was running. The DIA agents were either part of the cover-up or had been misled about the nature of the situation. Either way, she needed to get Ellis's information to someone who would investigate properly, someone outside Barnes' sphere of influence. When they reached her quarters, Agent Davis said, Consider yourself restricted to this room until further notice. That's a direct order, Major. Understood, Sarah replied, closing the door behind her. She immediately went to her laptop, but as expected, her network access had been revoked. Her phone had no signal. They had probably set up a jammer nearby. She was effectively isolated. But not helpless. Sarah had prepared for contingencies throughout her career. In her personal items was a secure satellite phone, not standard issue, but something she had acquired for emergencies during her special operations days. It was designed to bypass normal communications channels and connect directly to a secure network. She retrieved the phone from its hiding place in her gear and powered it on. It took several minutes to establish a connection, but finally indicated it was ready. Sarah had to choose carefully who to contact. It needed to be someone with enough authority to act, but outside the normal chain of command that might be influenced by Barnes or his associates. She dialed a number from memory. This is an emergency secure line, came a woman's voice. Identify yourself. Shadow Reaper with an urgent broken arrow report for General Hayes, Sarah said, using a code phrase that would indicate the highest level of priority. There was a pause, then authenticating, stand by. A minute later, a different voice came on the line, deeper, authoritative. "This is Hayes, Shadow Reaper report. Sir, I have credible evidence of a senior Marine Corps officer collaborating with a defense contractor to develop and test illegal chemical weapons in Syria. The officer is actively working to suppress this information and isolate witnesses. Names: Colonel Richard Barnes, currently stationed at Camp Lejeune, and Nexellen Industries, based in McLean, Virginia. CEO Victor Keller." There was a long pause. "That's a serious accusation, Major Mitchell." "Yes, sir. I have a first-hand witness, Staff Sergeant Thomas Ellis, recently extracted from Syria, who has seen documentation of these activities. He and his team are currently being held in isolation at the Camp Lejeune medical facility, ostensibly for debriefing, but actually to suppress their testimony." "And you're certain of this?" "Certain enough to risk my career by contacting you directly, sir." Another pause. "Your location?" "My quarters at Camp Lejeune. I've been confined here by DIA agents acting under Colonel Barnes' authority." "Understood. Maintain your position. Do not attempt to leave or contact anyone else. I'll handle this personally." The line went dead. Sarah sat on her bunk, the secure phone clutched in her hand. She had done what she could. Now it was a waiting game. Hours passed with no contact from outside. Sarah used the time to document everything she had learned, writing it all down in a detailed report. If something happened to her, she wanted a record to survive. It was nearly midnight when she heard vehicles outside, multiple engines, the sound of doors slamming, voices calling out orders. Then footsteps approaching her door. Sarah stood, ready to face whatever came next. The door opened without a knock. A woman in the uniform of a Marine Corps brigadier general stood there, flanked by several armed Marines who were definitely not base security. "Major Sarah Mitchell?" the general asked. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Brigadier General Diane Foster, Inspector General's office. I understand you have information regarding illegal activities involving Colonel Richard Barnes and Nexellen Industries." Sarah felt a wave of relief. The Inspector General's office had independent investigative authority. They answered to Congress, not the normal chain of command. "Yes, ma'am, I've prepared a preliminary report." She handed over the document she had written.